Everyone wants to be happy. However, society has influenced the way we define happiness and often associating it with accumulating material wealth. This should not be the case. In Goodbye Things by Fumio Sasaki, he shares how minimalism is the true key to living happy lives. He believes that sticking to what we need will help us appreciate the beauty of life. After all, we are no longer distracted by unnecessary possessions. To help us ease into the concept of minimalism, the author presents this book in two main parts. The first part of the book contains an illustration of various profiles, and the second half contains 5 chapters which digs deep into minimalism. With all the tips and lessons contained in this book, the author hopes to inspire his readers to embrace the same way of life. He believes that minimalism will not only change how we live, but it will also improve how we think. But most importantly, he believes that it will improve our outlook, thereby making us experience what true happiness is. Illustrations. Before beginning with the main discussions, the author introduces us to a variety of people who have embraced minimalism, including himself. In this part of the book, he illustrates how they live and how they embraced minimalism in their unique ways. Fumio Sasaki. The author sleeps in a room with only his airy mattress. Light pours into the room as the sun rises, and he believes that it makes waking up easier. His whole living space is painted in white walls, which makes the area appear more serene. Even though he loves cooking, his tableware is kept to only the basics. He also has a small closet where he keeps his uniform or similar pieces which complete his signature style. He also likes the simple designs of his living space because it makes it low maintenance. Other essential items he kept include his wallet, bicycle keys, eyeglasses, phone, and a watch. Hiji. The second profile is of Hiji, a securities dealer and one of the first minimalists in Japan. Hiji's kitchen only has a refrigerator, a rice cooker, and a microwave oven. He also sleeps on an airy mattress, which doubles as a sofa if he folds it up. Even with minimal possessions, Hiji uses his space in his home to play board games with friends. He also entertains himself with a head-mounted viewer where he can watch his favorite shows even without a television set. Ofumi and T. Ofumi and T are a minimalist couple who live in a 78-square-meter apartment. The author notes that the couple loves decorating, but items remain well-balanced so as to not disrupt the sense of peace. Among the items that they used as decorations are handmade hanging scrolls, a framed hand towel, and a simple wall clock. Yama-san. Yama-san is able to maintain a minimalist home for her family. She currently lives with her husband and 2 kids. The interior of Yama-san's home is limited to colors and hues which are easy on the eyes. She has limited their possessions to a couch, a TV, and a dining set. The spare room in their home was emptied and is now considered as a multifunction room. They sleep in a comfortable tatami room, which has a computer, a small desk, a lamp, and a wall clock, all neatly tucked in one corner of the room. The author also shares that Yama-san also has a uniform, a wardrobe composed of 8 simple items in limited colors. Koita Itu. Koita Itu is an avid traveler who keeps everything he needs in one backpack. Essential items in Koita's backpack include his passport and money, a water filter, a sleeping bag, a hammock, a scarf, and an emergency blanket. Koita is also known for his love for music, so he always has his headphones and Bluetooth speaker with him. Other gadgets Koita brings along include a laptop, an e-reader, a camera, his phone, a plug adapter, and the various cables and chargers required for each of these gadgets. He also has a travel kit where he can store his personal grooming items. With these varying profiles, we can now see that minimalism is not limited to a certain group of people. It is a way of life that welcomes everyone, whether you are single or married, or whether you're male or female. But regardless of their varying styles, there is something that all of them have in common: happiness. Why minimalism? Simple living has always been looked down upon. After all, we were all made to believe that we can only experience happiness if we amass material wealth. However, this is not and should never be the case. Come to think of it, we were all born as minimalists. All of us were born with nothing at all. We didn't even have clothes on our backs. Unfortunately, the drive to accumulate material possessions eventually took over as we were incorporated into society. According to the author, minimalist culture was particularly more prominent among the Japanese. He shares that prior to industrialization, the Japanese happily lived in simple homes which could be easily rebuilt, and each person only had about 2 or 3 kimonos. But although Japan is now a highly industrialized nation, minimalism is slowly making its way back to Japanese homes. In this book, the author will talk about minimalism. More particularly, he will talk about the new Japanese minimalism, which greatly changed the way he lived. A day in my life before I became a minimalist. Before digging deeper into the concept of minimalism, the author wanted to share how he lived his day-to-day life before and after he embraced minimalism. He hopes that it will make us appreciate this way of living and that it will encourage us to try it too. Back when he hadn't embraced minimalism, he would go home from work feeling exhausted. Because of that exhaustion, he would simply take his clothes off and leave them lying around the house. After taking a shower, he'd hop on the couch with a beer or a glass of wine and just catch up on shows or movies he'd missed. During those times, only liquor provided him with a sense of temporary happiness, and although he had a lot of possessions surrounding him, he couldn't deny that he was living miserably. Every morning, he wakes up with a terrible headache from all of the alcohol he consumed the night before. The fact that his alarm clock woke him up only makes his headache worse. He's reluctant to get out of bed and dreading the day already. Work isn't any different. He admits having an inability to concentrate at his work, so he would focus on minor tasks like checking and replying to emails. He also shares that he would leave as soon as it's time to leave, regardless of whether he has finished his tasks or not. But the worst part about this lifestyle is that he always had an excuse for not doing his best. He blamed his inability to wake up early on the fact that he works until it's late at night. He blamed being fat on his genes. His list of excuses was endless, and unfortunately, that led him to live with a negative mindset. Unfortunately, these excuses kept him from doing the things which could drastically help him improve the way he lived. He was stuck in an endless cycle of making excuses and living miserably. A day in my life as a minimalist. When the author finally embraced minimalism, he immediately noticed the improvement with the way he lived. As soon as he's home from work, he'd take a bath and change into comfortable clothes. He shares that since he no longer has a television set at home, he uses his spare time to read books or to write instead. With the extra space in his home, he is now able to do stretching exercises, which greatly helps him relax before he goes to bed. Waking up in the morning no longer feels like a chore. The author shares that he naturally wakes up as the sun rises, so he no longer relied on his alarm clock. He gets up as soon as he wakes up, so he has enough time to keep his futon bed and to enjoy breakfast. Finally, mornings no longer feel like a chore. He no longer considers his daily commute boring. In fact, it even made him appreciate the beauty of his surroundings. Overall, embracing minimalism made him truly happy. The definition of a minimalist. We now have an idea of how minimalism can change our lives. To get us into the proper mindset, the author finds it incumbent to define what a minimalist is. He understands that minimalism can mean various things to different people, but at its core, a minimalist is someone who knows what is important to him and sticks to limiting his possessions to these essential items. There is no hard and fast rule for people who wish to become minimalist. Different people have different interests, so what's important to one may be insignificant to the other. Thus, the secret to embracing minimalism is to assess yourself and your needs. Once you've identified which items are important, you can now dispose of those which are not as essential. However, this is easier said than done. There is no denying that society has instilled materialism within us, so parting with our possessions will feel like an absurd task. Nonetheless, it is possible. The author admits that he also struggled throughout the process. To make the transition easier for us, he lists down various tips to help us let go of our material attachments. He will present this list in succeeding chapters. Before we proceed with the rest of this book, the author reminds us that we shouldn't see minimalism as a goal in itself. He shares that it is simply a method of discovering which items are truly important to a person. We must keep this in mind as we continue to read on. Why did we accumulate so much in the first place? Before embracing minimalism, the author hardly realized that he already had what he needed in order to live a decent life. Since that feeling of being satisfied never crossed his mind, he was all the more driven to keep accumulating more things. But despite every material possession he had, he never felt satisfied. Now that minimalism helped him get a better perspective, he could now see the reasons why he was never happy. He believes that the following are the main reasons why we accumulate so much yet never become happy or satisfied. We get bored of the things we own. We're all familiar with the excitement we feel whenever we make a new purchase. But after we've used it for a couple of times, we tend to get tired of it. This creates a desire to purchase another item, and the cycle goes on. The author explains that this is due to the fact that we tend to adapt to change. Our brains are wired to recognize stimuli, which is often present whenever we encounter variance or change. This stimuli often provides us with a positive feeling, but as we get used to it, that initial excitement begins to fizzle out. Eventually, we become bored, so we look for new things which will provide us with that same feeling of excitement. Nonetheless, human beings are smart. We are fully capable of understanding and learning new things, but despite knowing that the satisfaction we get from buying new things is only temporary, we still find ourselves trapped in its cycle. The author believes that it is due to the fact that we use our present circumstances to predict our future feelings. The truth is, we are prone to making miscalculations. Keep in mind that our feelings and circumstances are constantly changing, thereby making our predictions about the future less accurate. This explains why we tend to go back to drinking even after we've sworn against it, just because we're no longer familiar with the feeling of a hangover. Thus, we can now see why we buy new things even when we know that the initial excitement won't last long. We want to show people our worth, and we do so through our possessions. History tells us that our ancestors only possessed tools which helped them live comfortably. Tools were often shaped from stones, and these made doing tasks a lot easier for them. To the ancient humans, these possessions were mere tools which helped them function effectively and efficiently. They didn't attach any value to them. They were made from stones after all. Fast forward to the present time, and we now see a world of difference. Industrialization paved the way for modern technology, making us live in comfort, the kind of luxury which our ancestors could only dream of. Unfortunately, with this comfort came the false belief that the amount of possessions we own reflect our value as human beings. This should never be the case. The author explains that this is due to the fact that human beings naturally belong in packs. But in order to feel accepted, we believe that we have to prove that our existence has value. This belief, however, only turns us into slaves of our possessions. From all of these, we can infer that we don't really need some of our possessions. Some of them may be essential for our day-to-day life, like clothing or toiletries. But some of them are just there to fill in a void, which, to be honest, may never be filled. As a result, we end up spending a lot of money, time, effort, and energy on these excess items. To effectively put an end to this cycle of accumulation, the author believes that minimalism can help us. Nonetheless, he recognizes that parting with our possessions can be difficult. We might find it wasteful to throw away items that are in mint condition. In the next chapter, the author provides us with pieces of advice to help us completely let go of our material attachments. 55 tips to help you say goodbye to your things. In this chapter, the author lays down 55 tips and an additional 15 to help us let go of our material possessions in order to fully embrace minimalism. 1. Reject the idea that we can't say goodbye to our possessions. This preconception of an inability to let go is all in our heads. According to the author, the problem lies in the fact that we have already given up trying to let go in the first place. To help us ease into the thought of letting go, he explains that human beings aren't accustomed to throwing things away. We have always been taught to keep and take care of our possessions. This makes us completely inexperienced in throwing them away. Fortunately, there is a technique which we can learn in order to get rid of the items that we don't need. 2. The decision to discard things you don't need is a skill. The author shares that decluttering by itself is something we can do within a week. What's really hard is making the decision to actually throw our things away. For this, the author encourages us to practice getting into the mindset of throwing things away. 3. Try to keep in mind that when you let go of something, you gain more in return. When we eliminate the things we don't need, we earn more time, space, freedom, and energy. In fact, the author shares that the gain we get from decluttering can be limitless. More on this topic will be discussed in the succeeding chapters. 4. Try to ask yourself why you're reluctant to let go of your belongings. The author believes that knowing why we can't let go of some things will help us understand why we're so attached to them in the first place. It may have been expensive, or may have sentimental value, or it may have been given by people you love. And whatever the reason may be, we shouldn't be ashamed of it. 5. Minimizing is not an impossible feat. The comfort we get from keeping our excess possessions makes it difficult for us to part with them. In order to embrace this new lifestyle, we must keep in mind that our desire to let go should be our top priority. 7. Let go of something now. It has been previously stated that the decision to throw away our belongings takes some skill. However, in order to hone that skill, we must start somewhere. The author thus recommends discarding something right now. He further adds that if we wait until we think we have the time, we could never get started because we always feel that we're running out of time. 8. We will not regret throwing items away. The author shares that one of the biggest factors preventing us from throwing our things away is our fear of regret. We often hold on to items we don't use because we think we'll be able to use them again someday. But more often than not, we never use them again. 10. Reduce the items which are in multiples. We often keep a dozen of the same thing, like pens or scissors, but we rarely use them all. Sometimes we have too many of the same kind that we even lose track of how many we have. Unfortunately, this only makes the house look more cluttered than it already is. Thus, the author recommends throwing out at least one item first just to get us started. Eventually, we will realize that we can still perform the same functions even when we have fewer items. 11. Get rid of items which were unused for at least a year. According to the author, if we don't have plans of using an item in the future, it's best to throw it out. As for the items we only use occasionally, he encourages us to rent them out instead. Nonetheless, it's still best to keep emergency equipment and supplies in case of unexpected disasters. 12. If it's just for the sake of showing off, let it go. The author understands that we are all concerned about how we want to be seen by the public, and the material possessions we have can make or break that impression. However, exerting the extra effort to maintain that image can take too much of your time and energy. In contrast, when we only keep the items we need and enjoy, maintaining them seems effortless. 13. Distinguish between your wants and your needs. As much as possible, only keep the items you need because these are the items which will help you survive. The author adds that identifying what you need can also guide you when it comes to making purchases. 14. Take photos of items that you seem attached to. The author shares that he resorts to this technique to make letting go feel less painful. According to him, the pictures will be there to remind us of the memories we had with it. In doing so, we start to distinguish between the memories with the item and the item itself. Eventually, this will help us let go of our attachment, which in turn will make decluttering easier. 16. Think of your possessions as roommates who make you pay for their rent. The author shares that there's a Japanese belief that you only need space for a few tatami in order to sleep comfortably, and half a tatami to sit comfortably. If we follow this principle, then we only need about 16 square feet to live comfortably. However, we prefer to live in bigger spaces, not because it brings us more comfort, but because we bring a lot of items with us. Unfortunately, bigger living spaces means paying more rent. So think about it. Do we really want to pay more for the extra space we don't really need? 17. Organizing and minimizing are two different concepts. Organizing means maximizing the use of space, while minimizing helps us free up space. When we stick to organizing, we remain stuck in a cycle of accumulating, and this doesn't really solve anything. There will always be continuous flow of items which will be cluttered around the house. But with minimizing, we effectively get rid of the clutter and reduce its flow into our space since we only buy the items we need. 19. If there are unused spaces in your home, make sure to keep them empty. We have a natural tendency to fill out unused spaces in our home, and this is the same idea that we must avoid at all costs. Instead of being compelled to fill the spaces, the author encourages us to think of those empty spots as places which will provide us with a sense of freedom. Eventually, the peace of mind that comes with having open, empty spaces will take us over. After all, we now have less clutter to deal with. 20. Aside from throwing away your things, try to throw away the thought of someday. The author shares that we tend to keep useless items simply because we believe that we'll be using them again someday. However, that day never arrives, and now we're stuck with a bunch of random items we'll never really use. To help us let go of the idea of someday, we must remind ourselves that the things we never needed now are those which we will never ever need. 21. Let go of the person you used to be. When we hold on to who we are in the past, it will be hard for us to let go of our possessions. We must always remind ourselves to focus on the now, whether or not something is useful for you right now, as opposed to whether or not an item has sentimental value. Doing so will be a brave step towards living a minimalist life. 22. Let go of the items which you have forgotten about. When we declutter because of minimalism, we make an inventory of all the items we own. While making this inventory, we often come across items which we have already forgotten about. We have various reasons for forgetting the items. It may be because it has been replaced by something better, or maybe we never found the right way to use it. Regardless of this reason, the undisputed fact is that we don't use it anymore. In letting go of these items, keep in mind that we were able to live day by day without using them anyway. 24. Don't hold on to the thought of getting your money's worth. This thought usually pops up when we buy expensive items which we rarely use, if not ever. It may be because it's a size too small, so we're holding on to it until we get to that size. After all, we paid for it, so we might as well enjoy it. However, the author shares that keeping those items will only cost us more money in the long run, like liabilities which depreciate over time. But most importantly, we experience peace of mind when we no longer have to think about those unnecessary items. 25. Don't stock up on supplies. We have a natural tendency to purchase everyday necessities in bulk. After all, we use it on a daily basis, so it's never a waste of our money. Nevertheless, the author notes that these necessities often go on sale, so we end up buying more than we really need. Sometimes the bargain seems too good to pass up on, so we hoard those items even when we still have a lot of them at home. This is where the problem lies. To help us control this problem, the author suggests only keeping one extra package at a time. 27. Take advantage of auction services. Based on his personal experience, the author shares that auction services make it faster and easier for us to say goodbye to our things. Auction services only require clients to fill out forms, and they will take care of all the necessary processes related to selling the item. This makes it easier for you to sell your items since you wouldn't feel too attached to them as opposed to when you're making the extra effort to sell them. Some of these auction services providers charge handling fees, but it's a reasonable fee to pay in exchange for peace of mind. 28. While you're on the subject of auctions, use the auction process as a last chance to take a look at your items. The author shares that Kuto Itao, his friend who has also embraced the minimalist lifestyle, prefers doing all the auction processes by himself since it allows him to reflect on each item. It makes him realize why he no longer needs it and why it would be best to let go. Writing down descriptions for each item is also a great way to reminisce all the good memories we've had with it. And for Kuta, the whole auction process helps him to move forward with his life. 29. Avail of pickup services when sending your items up after auctions. This minimizes the effort required when you have to pack and ship your stuff after a successful auction. We must keep in mind that in embracing minimalism, the minimizing our time and effort is the true key to success. 30. Don't be too attached to the prices that you paid. Brand new items will always be more expensive than used ones. Always bear in mind that the value of material possessions depreciate over time, so there's no use to hold on to an item's original price. As much as possible, the author encourages us to focus on the benefits we've gained from using the item. This will help shift our focus away from the price and onto its true value. And once we do this, parting with our possessions will become less of a chore. 31. Change the way you think about stores. When we think of stores as places we buy stuff from, we end up being drawn to affordable deals and bargains. Instead, the author encourages us to look at these stores as our personal warehouses, a place where we keep our extra items, and a place where we only go to when we need something. When we think this way, we feel less compelled to keep our storage areas in our home. Thus, we end up accumulating fewer items at our home. 33. When you're not passionate about an item, let it go. The author shares an excerpt from a book written by Datsuki Yosumi, which states that the more we like what we own, the more knowledgeable we become about it. He explains that when we are truly fond of an item, it helps us develop a sense of wonder. In contrast, those we just purchased without much thought are the ones which end up getting replaced because it doesn't make us feel satisfied. And when we don't feel satisfied, we end up buying more to try and fill in that void, which eventually gets us stuck in an endless loop of buying and keeping what we don't need. Thus, when making purchases, try to assess if it is something we are truly passionate about. After all, when we're satisfied with what we own, we are less likely to want more items. 34. In choosing which items you wish to part with, ask yourself if you are willing to buy it again after you've lost it. If your answer is yes, then it is something you both need and love. But if your answer is no, then it's something that you have to throw away. 35. Don't feel guilty about throwing away gifts you've received. To help us let go of gifts, the author encourages us to try and think of all the gifts we've given out. He explains that the act of giving and the gift itself doesn't really stay in our minds for a long time. Thus, the chances are high that the person who gave it to us won't remember it either. Besides, friendship is never conveyed through, nor is it represented by material objects. 36. In letting go of possessions of our deceased loved ones, try to imagine what they would have wanted to do with their belongings. When a loved one passes away, we hold on to their possessions in the belief that these will help us in remembering them. But if we try to imagine what they would have wanted, we will realize that they don't want us to be burdened with their possessions, which are probably useless to us. To help memories live on without being too attached to material possessions, the author encourages us to focus on the words spoken by or the memories shared with the deceased loved one. 38. Some items will start a chain reaction. To illustrate his point, the author shares that when we buy a phone or a computer, we end up buying all its necessary accessories. Without knowing it, we end up buying even more items than our initial purchase, and all these items will eventually take up your home's floor space. On the other hand, if we dispose of the items which caused the chain reaction, then we will be able to dispose of more accessory items. 39. The home is not a museum where you can store all your collections in. When we think of the collections safely stored in museums, we realize how truly priceless those items are. In contrast, our belongings are the opposite of these things, thus there's no use to hold on to them. 40. Let go of items which you can borrow from others. As an example, the author shares how we hold on to certain items like yearbooks because we don't want to bother others when we want to look at it. But come to think of it, your friends would probably love to hear from you, and if you feel like you're not welcome, then maybe they were never your friend in the first place. 41. Resort to renting if you only use it once or twice a year. Sometimes this is more practical than actually owning the item. Aside from saving you more money in the long, it also helps you save the time necessary for maintenance work. Doing so also reduces the clutter in your home, leaving you with more much-needed peace of mind. 42. Take advantage of social media. According to the author, when we share what we are doing on social media, we become bombarded with words of encouragement from our loved ones. This will help us stay motivated until we finally reach our goals. 43. Try to think of the items which you would get first if you had to start with nothing. More often than not, you will be left with the only items necessary for your survival. 45. If it disrupts the visual balance in your home, throw it away. We are able to relax better if our surroundings are visually pleasing. If an item stands out too much, create visual noise, then it's not helping you out. Minimalization goes hand in hand with creating a visually appealing space so that its inhabitants live in peace and relaxation. 46. Stick to the golden rule of minimizing. When you buy an item, get rid of one item first. The author admits that even when you're minimizing, there will still be items which we can't live without. But before making the purchase, assess your current possessions and look for something that you can throw out in exchange of the purchase. Doing so will prevent all your new purchases to pile up with the old, thereby avoiding another cycle of potential hoarding. To make it easier for us to ease into this concept, make sure that these items are of the same type. For example, if you need a new jacket, then you have to throw out an old jacket. 48. Mistakes help us grow. With this in mind, we shouldn't be ashamed of our mistakes. However, our pride often leads us to do the exact opposite of admitting our mistakes. The author shares that all of us are guilty of making mistakes whenever we go shopping. Often, we refuse to throw these items away because we feel like we haven't gotten our money's worth yet. We keep it in storage, thinking that we'll use it again someday. Unfortunately, we commit the same mistake over and over again, leaving us with a fat closet full of clothes we don't use anymore. The author shares that the secret to preventing this nasty hoarding cycle is to admit our mistakes. The faster we admit and own up to these mistakes, the faster we learn from them. 49. Think of buying from a different perspective. More specifically, think of it as simply renting. When you see your items with a sense of permanence, letting go can be quite the challenge. Conversely, when you see them as borrowed items, parting with them will be a lot easier. 50. Don't give in to cheap deals. Similarly, don't feel justified in taking an item you don't need just because it's free. According to the author, these marketing strategies will eventually cost us more in the long run. Think about the space it will use up in your home, the price you have to pay for its maintenance, and the time and effort you need for taking care of it. So the next time you see these deals, think things through before you decide to give in. Only keep the items which you strongly feel to keep. When we have to discard items, our tendency is to weigh out of the pros and cons. In instances of pros outweighing the cons or vice versa, the answer is clear to us. But if the pros weigh almost equally with the cons, the author encourages us to be brave enough to admit that it's time to say goodbye to that item. There are always various ways to reunite with items that we really need. The author notes that some people are reluctant to throw certain items away out of fear that they would never get to see it again. However, we must remember that we now live in a highly connected and highly digital age, an age when we can easily find what we're looking for in just a few clicks. For example, various auction websites now sell unique and limited edition second-hand items which may be exactly what you're looking for. You can even ask the person you gave it to if you can have it back. Thus, even when you've already parted with something, getting it back is not impossible. 54. Don't think that throwing away your belongings is being wasteful. The author admits that there is a lingering feeling of guilt whenever we throw items which can still be used. However, holding on to them when we don't really need them can cause us psychological damage. He explains that when we keep items simply because it seems wasteful to throw them away, we will continuously feel guilty about it since we never really get around to using it. The negative feelings of guilt and wastefulness will eventually consume us, thereby causing us more harm than good. 55. Saying goodbye doesn't mean forgetting them. The author shares that he used to keep a handwritten letter from his mom. He didn't have the courage to throw it away because it reminded him of a fond memory. However, as the years went on and the letters he received began to pile up, he had briefly forgotten about the letter. It had recently resurfaced when he finally decided to embrace minimalism. But although he had already thrown it away, he knew that it will be kept in his memory forever. Thus, when we say goodbye to an item, that final farewell would be like leaving a mental note which helps us remember the memory forever. 15 more tips for the next stage of your minimalist journey. The tips previously mentioned will help us ease into letting go of our possessions. In contrast, the next 15 tips will guide us as we move along our minimalist journey. 1. Owning less items doesn't mean that we feel less satisfied. The author reminds us that minimalism means embracing simplicity. Always bear in mind that it is more satisfying to own one item which we love unconditionally than owning 3 items which we are not all that crazy about. 2. Create your uniform. Steve Jobs is a known minimalist, and it shows in what he wears. Regardless of the occasion, Jobs is known to sport his black turtleneck, jeans, and sneakers, his unique uniform. He's not afraid to be seen in public wearing the same outfit over and over again. So, if a well-respected tech genius like Steve Jobs can do it, then there is nothing to hold us back from doing the same thing. 3. Owning less will help us find our unique sense of style. Since we are no longer distracted by the items we don't need, then we can fully embrace who we truly are. Our originality is often reflected in the items we choose to keep. 4. If we have thought about discarding an item for about 5 times, then it's time to really let it go. Sometimes we hold on to something because we merely have passing thoughts about throwing it away. We never really had the concrete thought of discarding it. But in these instances, the author encourages us to listen to these passing thoughts. 5. If you're not sure about throwing something away, just go ahead and get rid of it. The author shares that it's normal to feel the need to reacquire the same item that you've already discarded. Keep in mind that there is always a way to reunite with that item. 6. Experiencing some inconvenience can lead us to become happier. Sometimes we accumulate a lot of items because it helps us with our chores. Unfortunately, some of them take up too much space and too much time to maintain. In contrast, minimalists get by with minor inconveniences and realize that there's extra effort doesn't really hurt. Besides, the floor space and time saved gives us added peace of mind. 7. Even when something makes you feel so much joy, let it go. This is often the case with souvenirs. They tend to remind us of the happy moments we had while traveling. But some of them are just taking up floor space. Thus, the author recommends only looking at souvenirs. 8. Minimalism helps us experience freedom. Materialistic desires often have us in chains, so minimalism can help us set us free. This freedom helps us gain control of our lives and gives us the strength to move forward. 9. Owning fewer items doesn't mean that we are a lesser individual. We must always remember that our possessions do not determine our self-worth. 10. Don't be limited by the conventional ways we're taught to use things. When our possessions are limited, we explore and discover other ways to use them. Thus, when we know that certain things can be used in various ways, we can easily discard those which seem redundant. 11. Don't think too much. Our logical selves will always have reasons to stop us from disposing things we don't need. Instead, the author suggests trusting our instincts. If it doesn't feel right, throw it away. 12. Keep in mind that minimalism is not a competition. Minimalism helps us focus on the things we need, and different people have different needs. Some of us may need more items to be happy, so don't judge them just because you have less. 13. Sometimes the feeling we get from discarding items can be so addicting, so we keep on throwing them away even when we need them. Thus, the author encourages us to reflect on the item first before throwing it away. Ask yourself if it really is something you don't need anymore. 14. Don't be afraid to explore and discover your own kind of minimalism. As previously stated, minimalism leads us to discover what we need. And out of these needs, we can build an inventory which will help us live decent lives. We shouldn't imitate another minimalist's inventory because what's left with him are those which suit his needs, not yours. 15. Minimalism is not the goal in itself. The author believes that there are bigger goals we must attain, like happiness and contentment, and we can use minimalism as a method to attain them. Keep in mind that the author listed these tips to help us ease into this new lifestyle. The choice to embrace minimalism is still yours. Nonetheless, the author encourages us to at least give it a try. In order to do so, he lists down the various ways his life improved since he threw away his things. More on this in the next chapter. 12 ways I've changed since I said goodbye to my things. As briefly narrated in the first chapter, the author knew that there had been a drastic change in the way he lived right after he embraced minimalism. In this chapter, he specifies each aspect which has truly improved. 1. No longer running out of time. To begin with, the author has consistently been telling us that our possessions require maintenance work, and that can take up a lot of our time. The time spent for doing chores was so effectively reduced, but most importantly, he no longer felt the desire to obtain new things. In effect, he became less distracted by advertisements, nor was he tempted to go shopping. 2. Enjoying life more. With enough time in his hands, the author now has the opportunity to embrace what it feels like to be alive. Nonetheless, he attributes much of this joy to the fact that he is now able to maintain a clean home. He believes that the golden rule when it comes to being perceived as a polished individual is having a polished home. In other words, he was able to live an organized life, and along with it came being confident and feeling revitalized. 3. Experiencing freedom. Without the clutter in his home, he is now free to do the things he was unable to do back when it was still a mess. He also shares that he now feels free to choose the way by which he lives his life, including the house where he will live in. After all, owning a minimal amount of possessions wouldn't make it hard for him to move from one place to another. But most importantly, minimalism liberated him from the bonds of greed. With an understanding that he already has what he needs to live comfortably, he is no longer tempted to make unnecessary purchases. 4. No more comparisons with others. When we remain chained to our possessions, the tendency is to compare what we own with the possessions of others. However, comparing ourselves with others often leaves us feeling miserable and dissatisfied. The author shares that minimalism helps us get rid of that comparison by helping us focus on ourselves. This helps us discover who we really are, who we want to be, and what we want to do. 5. Not caring about what others think. Some of us hold on to our possessions just for the sake of appearances, which means that we allow our pride and self-consciousness to take over our lives. Fortunately, limiting our possessions to those which we only need can help us effectively combat these evils. 6. Being more involved with the world around us. The author admits being an extreme introvert before he embraced minimalism. He admits that he used to refrain from doing certain activities out of fear that he would embarrass himself. But now that he has fully embraced it, he now believes in taking risks. He believes that it is better to regret something that he has done rather than regret something he should have done. 7. Improved ability to focus. The author believes that each item sends us a certain message. It may be a book begging us to read it, or a broken light bulb asking to be replaced. As long as we are surrounded by these objects, we will be constantly bombarded by these silent messages. In effect, we get distracted easily. But when we limit our belongings to what we really need, we are finally able to live in peace. 8. Saving more money. Minimalism only requires minimal cost. Aside from not being tempted to make unnecessary purchases, minimalists only stick to a couple of essential items, thereby helping them save on rental costs. This minimalist mindset also helped the author become more conscious of the environment. He shares that during his pre-minimalist days, he used to buy bottled water on a regular basis. Fortunately, minimalism made him realize that buying bottled water will only increase the amount of plastic polluting the earth. Since then, he has switched to water filtration system, making him save money and the environment at the same time. 9. Feeling healthier and safer. Minimalists are known to possess the ability to distinguish between needs and mere desires, and this extends to the food they eat. This makes them less drawn to eat unhealthy food, and more importantly, less drawn to eating in excess. The author also notes that being a minimalist makes him feel safer. This is due to the fact that he is not in danger of objects flying around and hitting him, which is especially true in case of natural disasters. 10. Forging deeper relationships with people. Aside from focusing on ourselves, minimalism also helps us focus on the fact that the people around us are human beings. Since we no longer focus on what people own, we no longer foster the feelings of greed and jealousy, and this freedom from negative emotions effectively improves our socialization skills. 11. Embrace living in the moment. As previously stated, making predictions about the future is a sign of living as a minimalist. Unfortunately, worrying about the future only makes us tired and unhappy. The author shares that we only live in an eternal present. We must never be stuck in the past nor look to the future. In other words, we must savor living in the present so that we can embrace what it truly means to living. 12. Sensing true gratitude. In Chapter 2, the author discusses how boredom can cause the accumulation of unnecessary properties. Fortunately, there is a way to fight that boredom, and that is through being truly grateful. The author shares that true gratitude comes from reflecting on how things came to be and for what purpose those things will be used for. Once we develop that sense of true gratitude, we will always feel justified, even for the simplest of things. With all these benefits in mind, we know that we are on the path towards a fulfilling life. But there is still something else we need to know, the true meaning of happiness. Feeling happy instead of becoming happy. Throughout our lives, society has dictated impossible standards by which we define happiness. We've always been told to get a stable job, build a fulfilling career, and start a family. For years, society has made us believe that we have to achieve all of this in order to be happy. But happiness is not something we aim to achieve. The author explains that happiness is something that is already within us. He adds that 50% of our happiness is determined by our genetics, which explains why some babies seem to have a happier disposition than others. Another 40% of our happiness results from our actions, but the remaining 10% is due to environmental factors. Taking all of these into consideration, we can see that only 10% of our happiness can be attributed to the world around us. According to the author, this is the true extent to which money can buy our happiness. The rest is up to us. With that in mind, the author wishes to emphasize that happiness is something we become. We shouldn't see happiness as a reward for doing or buying something. If we stick to that idea, we'll surely get stuck in the cycle of unhappiness. Instead, we should focus on feeling happy. According to the author, minimalism highlighted and enlarged the happiness he already had inside. This is owing to the fact that it helped him focus on living in the present. By living in the now, he no longer spent his time worrying about his future. He was no longer conscious about what people would say about him, especially for his acts done in the past. But most importantly, minimalism fostered his feelings of gratitude. He became more appreciative of the people and objects around him. He no longer had the urge to splurge on items he didn't need because he was sincerely satisfied with what he had. He now knew what it feels like to have peace of mind. He feels happy. Nonetheless, he reminds us that minimalism is simply a method by which we attain our goals. After all, there are people who live happy and content lives despite not embracing minimalism. The real goal, according to the author, is to live by the principles and lessons taught by minimalism. Simple living is the key to a happy life. Unfortunately, we are constantly bombarded by media messages claiming that we can only experience happiness when we accumulate wealth. To help us get rid of this misconception, Fumio Sasaki introduces us to the new Japanese minimalism. In the past, the author notes that the Japanese lived as minimalists. But since the nation embraced industrialization, they began to accumulate possessions much like their foreign neighbors. Fortunately, modern Japanese people are retracing their roots and are slowly embracing minimalism once again. And this is what this book is all about, what it means to be a minimalist in the digital age. Minimalism is defined as a way of life whereby we limit our possessions to what we need. It means feeling a genuine sense of satisfaction with what we have, even though we don't have much. And when we live in satisfaction, we also experience happiness and peace. Nonetheless, media keeps telling us to buy items, and more often than not, we do what it says. As a result, our homes are usually filled with items we barely even use, but why do we fall for these advertisements in the first place? The author shares that these are two main reasons why we collect unnecessary items. The first is because of a boredom cycle. He explains that human beings often get excited when we experience something new, the same kind of excitement we feel when we buy new things. However, that initial excitement doesn't last long. In fact, he goes on to add that this feeling only lasts for a couple of hours. Once we no longer are satisfied with our new possessions, we move on to making another one just to preserve that feeling of excitement. Unfortunately, this only creates a never-ending cycle of making purchases which leaves us with a bunch of items we don't need. The other reason is the fact that we try to make predictions about our future. However, the author points out that we make predictions based on our current state, and this can never be an accurate point of reference for what we might do in the future. To illustrate, We often swear off drinking after we wake up with a terrible headache. But after a few months, we go back to drinking because the headache is now a distant memory. The same goes for when we're accumulating items. Even when we promise to never fall for bargains and discounts again, we often break it as soon as we have enough money to go shopping. Fortunately, these two items can be addressed through minimalism. But embracing minimalism doesn't mean that we have to rush into throwing things away. The author recognizes that we might feel hesitant at first, especially since it may feel like such a waste. Thus, it's okay to throw one item out at a time. You can throw more items away once you're eased into the idea. After all, we can fully embrace it only if we do so at our own pace. Throughout the book, the author kept reminding us that minimalism is just a method by which we can achieve our ultimate goals. He believes that the true objective is to live life in accordance with the lessons from minimalism. Only then can we experience true happiness.